You know how every small American town has that one story, something that everyone knows about, but no one talks about openly? In my hometown, Mill Creek, that story wasn't about an old house or some tragic murder. It was about the lights. Strange, glowing lights that appeared out by the creek late at night, leading people into the woods, where they were never seen again. I swear to you, what I'm about to share is not some campfire tale or an internet creepypasta. This happened to me. And I've never been the same since. I grew up in Mill Creek, population just under 2,000. The kind of town where everybody knows everybody, where Main Street had more empty storefronts than open ones, and the old diner was where gossip spread faster than the coffee got cold. The town was surrounded by thick woods and farmland, with the creek cutting through like a dark ribbon. It wasn't much, but it was home. As kids, we all knew the rules: don't wander out by the creek after sundown, and if you saw the lights, you looked away. Adults told us it was just swamp gas, or headlights from trucks out on the backroads, but the way they said it, flat, forced, and uneasy, told a different story. And the fact that kids from town sometimes went missing, always near the creek, only made the whispers stronger. By the time I was 17, I thought I was too old for ghost stories. I was restless, tired of small-town boredom, and looking for something, anything, that would make me feel alive. That's probably why I agreed to go out to the creek with my two best friends, Aaron and Lily, one summer night. We weren't hunting for the lights, exactly. We told ourselves it was just for fun: grab a six-pack, walk the trails, maybe scare each other with some stories. But deep down, I think we all wanted to test the legend. To see if the lights were real. We left just after midnight, when the town was quiet and the air was heavy with the smell of pine and damp earth. The moon was high, but the woods swallowed most of the light, so our flashlights cut sharp beams through the darkness. Aaron led the way, tall and cocky, the kind of guy who always laughed the loudest and dared everyone else to go further than they wanted. Lily stuck close to me, her nervous chatter filling the silence. She kept asking if we should turn back, if we were really going to do this, and Aaron just kept teasing her. We reached the creek after about 20 minutes. The water moved slow, reflecting thin streaks of moonlight, the surface broken only by the occasional ripple of something unseen beneath. The woods pressed close, thick and suffocating. We sat on a fallen log, cracked open the beers, and tried to laugh like it was just another night. That's when the air changed. The forest grew too quiet, no crickets, no frogs, no rustle of leaves. Just stillness. Heavy, unnatural stillness. My skin prickled, every hair on my body standing on end. Aaron started to say something, but Lily shushed him, eyes wide. She pointed across the creek. And there they were. Lights. Not headlights, not flashlights. These were soft, pulsing orbs of pale green and blue, hovering just above the ground. They moved slowly, weaving between the trees like they were alive. There had to be at least half a dozen, floating in and out of sight, casting faint glows that shimmered on the surface of the water. I felt my throat go dry. The stories were true. Aaron stood up, grinning like an idiot. Well, damn. Looks like we found them. Lily grabbed his arm. Don't go over there. Her voice was shaking. But Aaron was already stepping toward the creek, his eyes locked on the lights. I wanted to grab him, to pull him back, but part of me was frozen, entranced by the strange beauty of the glow. The lights weren't just shining. They were beckoning. Drawing us in. Aaron reached the water's edge and paused. One of the lights drifted closer, hovering inches above the creek. His face was bathed in the glow, and I swear I saw his expression soften, like he was a little kid again. Then he stepped into the water. Aaron, stop! I shouted, my voice cracking. He didn't even look back. The water rippled around his legs as he waded across, his body bathed in that unearthly glow. Lily was crying now, begging him to come back, but it was like he couldn't even hear us. When he reached the other side, the lights moved deeper into the woods. Aaron followed. Just like that. No hesitation. No goodbye. And then he was gone. For a long moment, Lily and I just stood there, too shocked to move. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get as far from that place as possible. But another part of me, the same reckless curiosity that had brought me there, wanted to follow, to see what Aaron saw. That's when one of the lights drifted across the creek, slowly, silently, until it hovered just feet away from us. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. It was beautiful and terrible all at once, its glow flickering in patterns that felt almost alive, almost intelligent. Lily grabbed my arm and yanked me backward. "Don't look at it," she screamed. "We have to go, now." Her voice snapped me out of the trance, and together we bolted into the woods, crashing through the underbrush, branches whipping at our faces. Behind us, the glow followed, faint and pulsing, never hurrying, just drifting closer and closer, like it knew we couldn't outrun it. We didn't stop until we burst out of the woods and into the empty road leading back into town. The lights didn't follow past the tree-line. They just hung there, pulsing faintly in the dark, watching. That was the last time I saw Aaron. The police searched, of course. They combed the woods, dragged the creek, questioned everyone. But they found nothing. No footprints, no clothes, no trace of him at all. It was like he had never existed. Lily refused to talk about it. She shut down completely, and within weeks, her parents sent her to live with relatives in another state. I stayed in Mill Creek, but I couldn't escape the whispers. People said Aaron had run away, that he'd gotten mixed up in drugs, that we were covering for him. But I knew the truth. I saw him vanish into those lights. And here's the part that still keeps me up at night, years later. Sometimes, when I drive past the woods late at night, I see them again. The lights. Floating just beyond the trees, pulsing like a heartbeat. And every now and then, if the wind is just right, I swear I hear a voice calling from the dark. Aaron's voice. And that's when I finally understood the cruelest twist of all. The lights don't just take people. They keep them. Forever. What I'm about to tell you happened in the late 90s, in a town so small you wouldn't find it on most maps, Ashbury, Indiana. Back then, the town only had a single stoplight, one grocery store, and a gas station that doubled as a hangout spot for teenagers who had nowhere else to go. But the one place nobody ever hung around was the old house on Willow Lane. It sat at the very end of the road, past where the pavement turned to gravel, shrouded in overgrown trees that seemed to lean over it like crooked fingers. It wasn't abandoned, at least, not in the usual sense. The place wasn't falling apart, and the grass was always mysteriously short, but nobody ever saw the owners. No kids played in the yard. No mail ever came. No lights ever turned on. Locals called it the Silent House. And everyone knew better than to linger near it after dark. When I was 17, I didn't buy into ghost stories. My friends and I were obsessed with horror movies, and we thought half the things adults warned us about were just scare tactics to keep us in line. So one sticky summer night, with nothing to do, I let my buddy Trevor talk me into sneaking over to Willow Lane. "It's just a house," he kept saying, grinning like an idiot as he tossed a flashlight in his hand. "If it's so haunted, we'll get a good laugh. And if it's not, we can finally call out the town's biggest bullshit story." I wasn't thrilled, but Trevor was the kind of guy who thrived on dares, and I'd always been too stubborn to back down once I'd agreed to something. Our other friend, Mia, came along too, though she hated the idea from the start. We walked the gravel road, our sneakers crunching underfoot, cicadas screaming in the humid night air. The moon was bright, but the closer we got to the end of Willow Lane, the darker it seemed to get, as if the trees were swallowing the light. And then we saw it. The house stood silent, its white paint faded, its windows dark and empty. It wasn't falling apart, but it looked wrong. Like a photograph of a house instead of a real one. Too still. Too quiet. "See?" Trevor whispered, grinning. "Just an old house. No big deal." But Mia grabbed my arm. "Do you hear that?" she said, her voice trembling. At first, I thought she meant the silence, the way the cicadas had suddenly stopped, leaving the night unnervingly empty. But then I heard it too. A faint creaking sound, rhythmic, like footsteps on floorboards. Coming from inside the house. Trevor's grin faltered, but only for a second. "It's probably just the wood settling," he said. But his voice lacked conviction. We crept closer, our flashlights catching on weeds that clawed up from the dirt. When we reached the front porch, I swear the air got colder. Not cooler, not breezier, colder. Like stepping into a basement after standing in the sun. The front door was closed, but as Trevor pushed at it, it swung inward without a sound. The creaking inside stopped. We froze. "Guess it's an open house," Trevor joked weakly, but no one laughed. Inside, the air smelled faintly of dust and something metallic, like old coins or dried blood. The living room was neat but outdated, with floral wallpaper peeling at the edges and heavy curtains that blocked the moonlight. Everything was too clean, as if it hadn't been touched in decades but was somehow still dust-free. Then we noticed something even stranger. There were no pictures. Not on the walls, not on the shelves. No family portraits, no knickknacks, no sign that anyone had ever lived there at all. "This is messed up," Mia whispered. "We shouldn't be here." But Trevor was already moving deeper inside, his flashlight beam bouncing off the walls. The creaking started again. Louder this time. From upstairs. We all froze, staring at the staircase that rose into darkness. The sound was unmistakable, slow, deliberate footsteps. Mia shook her head violently. "No. I'm not going up there." But Trevor smirked and started up the stairs anyway. "Fine. Stay down here. I'm gonna prove it's just the wind or something." I didn't want to follow him. Every instinct in my body screamed to get out. But the thought of leaving him alone up there felt worse. So, against my better judgment, I followed, with Mia clinging to my shirt like a terrified child. The stairs groaned under our weight, each step echoing too loudly in the suffocating silence. At the top, a narrow hallway stretched out, lined with closed doors. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Every door had a keyhole. And from every keyhole, faintly, softly, came the sound of breathing. "Holy shit," I whispered. Trevor laughed nervously. "It's probably just." He didn't finish. Because one of the doors at the end of the hall creaked open by itself. Just a sliver. Enough for us to see that the room beyond was completely dark. The breathing stopped. Mia squeezed my arm so tight it hurt. "We need to go. Now." For once, Trevor didn't argue. He backed away slowly, and I started to follow, when something caught my eye. A figure. In the sliver of open door, just barely visible in the dark, stood the outline of a person. Still, silent, watching. My blood ran cold. Then, with a sharp slam, the door shut. We bolted. Down the stairs, through the living room, out the front door, and onto the gravel road. We didn't stop running until we reached the edge of town, gasping for breath, our hearts hammering like we'd sprinted a marathon. None of us talked about it that night. Or the next. Or the next. It was like we'd silently agreed to bury it, to pretend it never happened. But a week later, Trevor was gone. His parents said he'd run away. The police found no signs of struggle, no notes, no leads. Just an empty bedroom. But Mia and I knew better. We remembered the silent house. The footsteps. The breathing. The figure in the dark. I swore I'd never go near that place again. But a year later, curiosity got the better of me. I drove down Willow Lane one night, just to see if the house was still there. It was. Only this time, the curtains weren't drawn. And in the upstairs window, I saw Trevor. Just standing there. Silent. If you ever find yourself driving down Route 67 through Missouri late at night, you might pass by an old diner with a flickering neon sign that says "Last Stop Diner." If you do, keep driving. I'm telling you this because I didn't. And I don't think I'll ever forgive myself for that mistake. It happened in 2003. I was in my early 20s, fresh out of college, and trying to drive cross-country to start a new job in Denver. Money was tight, so I didn't want to stop at hotels unless I had to. My plan was to push through long stretches of highway, nap in the car when needed, and only stop for food or gas. It was well past midnight when I found myself on Route 67, deep in rural Missouri. The road was empty, the radio barely picked up static, and I was fighting the kind of exhaustion that makes your eyes burn. I knew I needed caffeine, something to keep me awake. That's when I saw it. The neon sign appeared out of the dark like a beacon, "Last Stop Diner." The sign buzzed faintly, the S stopped flickering on and off. The parking lot was nearly empty, save for one beat-up pickup truck parked near the door. It was weird, I'd been on that stretch of road before, but I didn't remember ever seeing the diner. Still, I was too tired to question it. Inside, the diner was almost eerily clean. Chrome counters, red leather booths, a jukebox in the corner that looked brand new even though the model was from the 60s. The smell of fresh coffee and bacon hung in the air, comforting and strangely out of place at 2 in the morning. There was only one waitress, a pale woman with bright red lipstick and hair pinned up like she'd stepped out of another era. Her name tag read Dolly. She smiled when I came in, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Take a seat anywhere, hon," she said in a flat, sing-song voice. I slid into a booth. The menu was simple: burgers, pancakes, eggs, coffee. I ordered a cup of coffee and some fries, just enough to keep me awake for the road. Dolly nodded and walked back to the counter, her shoes clicking too loudly against the tile. While I waited, I glanced around. The place was spotless, but it felt frozen. Like a movie set that had been perfectly staged but didn't have any real life in it. That's when I noticed the other customers. There were 3 of them, sitting separately in different booths. None of them spoke. None of them ate. They just stared. One was an old man with a weathered face, his hands clasped tightly on the table. Another was a woman in a sundress, her head tilted slightly to the side like she was listening to something only she could hear. The third was a teenager, maybe 16, his eyes wide and unblinking. And all of them were staring at me. Dolly returned with my coffee, placing it on the table with a porcelain clink. The cup was steaming, but when I wrapped my hands around it, it felt cold. I looked up at her, my mouth dry. How long have you guys been open out here?" She smiled that strange, painted-on smile. "Long as anyone can remember." I forced a laugh. "Weird, I've driven this road before and never saw the place." Her smile faltered for just a second. "We're here when you need us," she said softly. Then she turned and walked away. I should have left right then. But exhaustion and stubbornness kept me glued to the booth. I took a sip of the coffee, and nearly gagged. It wasn't just bitter. It tasted metallic, almost coppery, like blood. I spat it back into the cup, my stomach churning. When I looked up, all 3 customers were smiling at me. Wide, unnatural smiles that didn't belong on their faces. I shoved the cup away and stood up. "You know what? Forget it. I'll just..." But Dolly was suddenly right there, blocking my path. I hadn't even heard her approach. "Leaving so soon?" she asked, her voice still sing-song, but sharper now. "Yeah, I've got a long drive ahead." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "That's a shame. We don't get many visitors anymore." Behind her, the old man in the booth stood up. Then the woman. Then the teenager. All 3 of them moving in unison, their eyes locked on me. My heart pounded. Something was terribly, terribly wrong. I bolted past Dolly, nearly knocking her over, and ran for the door. It flew open easily, the humid night air hitting me like a wall. I sprinted to my car, fumbling with the keys, my hands shaking. As I slammed the door shut, I glanced back at the diner. The parking lot was empty. No truck. No neon sign. No building. Just an endless stretch of dark road and trees. I sat there, gasping for breath, my coffee-stained hands trembling on the steering wheel. I had just been inside that place. I could still smell the coffee, still taste the metallic bitterness on my tongue. But it was gone. Completely gone. I drove straight through the night, not daring to stop until the sun came up and I reached a crowded gas station in a different town. When I asked a cashier about the last stop diner on Route 67, he looked at me like I'd grown two heads. "There's no diner out there," he said. "Hasn't been for decades." He told me that, back in the 50s, there had been a diner by that name on Route 67. But one night, it caught fire with a handful of customers and the waitress trapped inside. They all died. The building was destroyed, and nothing had been built there since. My skin crawled. I asked if he remembered the name of the waitress. He frowned, thinking. "I think it was Dolly." "Yeah. Everyone knew her. Sweet girl." "Shane, what happened?" To this day, I can't drive down Route 67 at night. I take the long way around, no matter how much extra time it adds. Because sometimes, I swear I see a flicker of neon light in the trees. And I know that if I ever stop again, I won't come back. Every small town has at least one church, right? In my hometown of Ravenbrook, Ohio, we had 3. 2 were normal enough, Sunday sermons, summer picnics, the usual. But the third one, St. Mary's Chapel, wasn't like the others. Because St. Mary's never closed. Day or night, weekday or holiday, that little chapel on the edge of town always had its doors unlocked, the candles inside always burning. People said it was because the priest believed the church should be a shelter for lost souls at all times. But there was something off about that place. Something no one talked about. I used to think it was just superstition. Until the night I went inside. And what I saw there has haunted me ever since. It was October 2008, my senior year of high school. A few of us were hanging out after a football game, driving around town with nothing to do. My friend Caleb brought up the chapel. "You ever notice it's never locked?" he said, leaning back in the passenger seat of my old Chevy. "People say if you go in after midnight, you can hear the choir singing, even though the place has been empty for years." That made everyone in the car laugh. Ravenbrook was the kind of town where ghost stories got recycled every Halloween. But Caleb wasn't laughing. He leaned forward, eyes glinting. "I dare you to go," he said. "Tonight. No excuses." Now, I should mention, Caleb was the kind of guy who lived on dares. If you didn't rise to the challenge, he'd never let you hear the end of it. And with 2 other friends in the back seat egging me on, I caved. So just after midnight, we pulled up in front of St. Mary's Chapel. It looked harmless enough from the outside. A small brick building with a steeple that tilted slightly to one side, its white paint weathered and peeling. The parking lot was cracked and empty. No other cars. No signs of life. But the front doors stood wide open. As I stepped out of the car, the night air felt heavier, thicker, like the atmosphere before a storm. My friends stayed behind, promising they'd honk if anything happened. I took a deep breath and walked toward the chapel. The moment I crossed the threshold, I noticed 2 things. First, it was warm inside. Too warm. Like stepping into a sauna compared to the crisp October air outside. Second, the candles. Dozens of them lined the altar and windowsills, flickering brightly, but the air didn't smell like wax or smoke. In fact, it didn't smell like anything at all. The pews stretched out in perfect rows, polished and clean despite no one ever attending services there. The stained glass windows glowed faintly from moonlight, casting warped colors across the floor. And then, faintly, I heard it. Singing. At first I thought it was my imagination. A soft, low hum, rising and falling like the swell of voices in harmony. I froze, my heart pounding, straining to hear. It wasn't coming from speakers or a recording. It was coming from inside the chapel. "Hello?" I whispered, my voice cracking in the silence. The singing stopped. I stood there, frozen, the silence pressing against my ears. And then, from the very back of the chapel, a single voice answered. Welcome. I spun around, my flashlight beam cutting through the pews. At the far end, near the last row, stood a man. He was tall and thin, wearing a priest's collar. His face was pale, his eyes too dark to read in the dim light. Sorry, I stammered. I didn't think anyone was here. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. We are always here. Something about the way he said we sent a shiver down my spine. I wanted to back out, to leave, but my legs wouldn't move. Would you like to join us? He asked softly. Before I could respond, the singing started again. Louder this time. Dozens of voices, echoing off the walls, surrounding me. But the pews were empty. Every last one. I turned back toward the priest, but he was gone. Panic surged through me. I bolted down the aisle toward the doors. But when I reached them, they weren't open anymore. They were shut tight. I shoved at them with all my strength, but they wouldn't budge. Behind me, the singing grew louder, swelling like a storm. The air thickened, heavy with invisible weight. I turned back and nearly screamed. The pews weren't empty anymore. Every row was filled with people. Men, women, children. Dressed in clothes from different decades, their faces pale and waxy, their eyes blank. They sang in unison, their mouths moving but their chests never rising for breath. And standing at the pulpit was the priest, his dark eyes locked on me. You came, he said, his voice echoing unnaturally. Now you belong. I don't remember much after that. Just flashes. The choir surging forward, their faces twisted into grotesque smiles. My own scream drowned out by their endless hymn. A burning heat wrapping around me like fire. The next thing I knew, I was outside, sprawled on the pavement by the car. My friends were standing over me, pale and wide-eyed. They said I'd only been inside for 2 minutes, but to me, it felt like hours. When I told them what I saw, they swore the chapel was empty the whole time. No singing, no priest, no congregation. Just silence. I moved away from Ravenbrook the moment I graduated. I told myself it was just exhaustion, stress, imagination. But then, last year, my mom called. She still lives there. She told me St. Mary's had finally been torn down. The building had started to crumble, and the town decided it was a safety hazard. They brought in a demolition crew. But when the workers knocked down the walls, they found something inside the foundation. Bones. Hundreds of them. Stacked neatly, as if they'd been placed there on purpose. I haven't been back to Ravenbrook since. But sometimes, late at night, I swear I hear singing. Soft, distant. A hymn with no words. And I know, deep down, that the church never really closed. It never will. I grew up in a very small town in Kansas. The kind of place where everyone knows your business, and gossip spreads faster than the wind across the wheat fields. For the most part, it was quiet, safe, and predictable. But every town has that one house, the one nobody talks about out loud, but everyone whispers about behind closed doors. For us, it was the old Kramer house. It sat at the end of Willow Lane, a dirt road that most people avoided unless they had a good reason to go down it. The house itself wasn't anything spectacular, 2 stories, faded yellow paint, a sagging porch. But there was something about it that made people uneasy. Even in broad daylight, it looked wrong. When I was a kid, I'd ride past it on my bike as fast as I could, refusing to look at the windows because I always felt like someone was looking back. My parents told me to stay away from it. Bad things happen there, my dad once muttered after having too much whiskey, but he wouldn't explain further. For years, I kept my distance. Until curiosity, and a stupid dare, forced me inside. It was the summer of 2010, right after my sophomore year of high school. A group of us were hanging out in the park late at night, bored and restless, when someone brought up the Kramer house. "You know, no one's lived there in like 20 years, my friend Mason said. They say the last family just up and left. Didn't take any furniture, didn't sell it, just left everything behind. Because it's haunted," another kid chimed in. "My cousin swears he saw lights in the upstairs window last year. Said he heard voices when he got close to the porch." That was enough to get everyone riled up. Eventually, Mason grinned at me and said, "Bet you won't go inside." Now, I had a reputation for being the chicken of the group. Always the one who bailed first during scary movies, always the one who backed out of dares. I was sick of it. So against every ounce of common sense in my body, I agreed. 10 minutes later, we were standing in front of the Kramer house. The porch creaked under my weight as I climbed the steps. The front door was slightly ajar, swaying with the breeze, as if it had been waiting for me. I turned back to my friends. They were huddled together by the road, whispering nervously. "Go on," Mason hissed, his grin faltering. I pushed the door open. The smell hit me first. Not dust, not mold, not even rot. It was metallic, sharp, like blood. The living room looked frozen in time. The furniture was still there, couch, armchair, a coffee table stacked with old magazines. But everything had a thick layer of dust, and the air felt heavy. I pulled out my phone for light and stepped inside. The floor groaned under me. That's when I heard it. A whisper. At first, I thought it was the wind through the cracks. But no, it was inside. A voice, low and quick, like someone muttering just out of earshot. I spun around, shining my light across the room, but nothing moved. I told myself it was nerves. Just nerves. But then the whisper said my name. I froze, my skin crawling. The voice came from the hallway that led deeper into the house. Against my better judgment, I followed it. The walls were lined with old photographs, their glass frames cracked, the faces inside faded and blurry. The whisper grew louder, clearer, though I couldn't make out the words. My phone flickered, the screen dimming. I reached the kitchen, and that's when I saw it. The chairs around the table were pulled out, as if people had just been sitting there. The table itself was covered in plates, silverware, and half-eaten food, except the food was rotten, green with mold, but the plates looked freshly placed, not a speck of dust on them. The whispering stopped. And then, all at once, I realized the silence wasn't natural. The whole house was holding its breath. That's when I heard the floorboards upstairs creak. Slow, deliberate steps. Someone, or something, was walking above me. I should have left right then, but something strange came over me. It felt like the house itself didn't want me to leave. Like the walls were leaning in, urging me forward. My legs moved before my brain caught up. I found myself climbing the staircase, every step groaning under my weight. At the top, a long hallway stretched ahead, lined with doors. One was open, just slightly. Light spilled out from inside, flickering like candlelight. I pushed the door open. The room was a child's bedroom. Toys scattered across the floor, a small bed in the corner, the wallpaper peeling in strips. On the desk was a single cassette recorder, its red light blinking. Without thinking, I pressed play. The tape crackled, and then a voice, soft, strained, familiar, spoke. "Stop listening." The tape clicked off. I staggered back, my chest tight, my heart pounding. That was my voice. Before I could process it, the recorder clicked back on by itself. The tape whirred, and my voice spoke again. "I told you not to come here." I dropped the recorder and bolted for the stairs. But as I reached the top step, every door in the hallway slammed shut at once. The walls groaned, the air vibrating with a deep hum, like the house itself was angry. The whisper returned, louder now, overlapping voices chanting my name again and again, filling every corner of the house. I don't remember getting out. I just remember running, crashing through the front door, and not stopping until I reached the road where my friends were waiting. They said I'd only been inside for 5 minutes, but it felt like hours. They swore they didn't hear anything from outside, no whispers, no doors slamming, nothing. Just silence. I never went back. But here's the part that keeps me awake at night. A week later, I found the cassette recorder in my backpack. I don't know how it got there. I never touched it after I dropped it. When I played it, the tape was blank. Except at the very end. My voice, whispering. I'm still here. I grew up in a farming town in Iowa, where corn stretched farther than the eye could see and summer nights smelled like earth and cut grass. It was the kind of place where nothing ever happened, until one summer when I was 15. That's when I started seeing him. At first, I thought it was just my imagination. You know how small towns are, you get bored, restless, and your mind starts creating things to entertain itself. But no, this was real. Too real. The first time it happened was in June. I was biking home from a friend's house at dusk. The sky was painted pink and orange, fireflies glowing along the ditch. The fields on either side of the road swayed with the wind, tall and endless. That's when I noticed him. A man. Standing perfectly still at the edge of the cornfield. He was too far away to make out details, but I could see his silhouette. Tall. Thin. Wearing a wide-brimmed hat. His arms hung unnaturally long at his sides. He didn't move. Didn't wave. Didn't even look like he was breathing. He just stood there, watching. I pedaled faster, heart pounding, telling myself it was just some farmer checking his crops. But when I glanced back, he was gone. For weeks, I convinced myself it was nothing. Until it happened again. It was July, and I was walking home after dark. The moon was bright, lighting up the road, the fields rippling like an ocean. That's when I saw him again. Same spot. Same wide-brimmed hat. But this time, he was closer. I froze. My legs refused to move. He was maybe 50 feet away, just inside the stalks, half hidden by the corn. His head tilted ever so slightly, like he was studying me. And then, he stepped forward. I ran like hell, sprinting the rest of the way home, not daring to look back. I didn't tell anyone at first. I thought they'd laugh, say I was seeing shadows. But the next night, I overheard my mom and dad talking in the kitchen after they thought I was asleep. Another sighting, my mom whispered. Dad sighed. Yeah. Jenkins said he saw him again last night by the east field. Just standing there. Watching. My stomach dropped. It wasn't just me. Other people had seen him too. That's when I started noticing the rules. He only appeared near the cornfields, never in town. Always at dusk or after dark. And every time someone saw him, he was closer than the last time. By August, he was practically at the roadside. I saw him one evening from my bedroom window. He was standing in the ditch across from our house, hat low over his face, arms dangling. Just waiting. I didn't sleep that night. I finally told my friend Mason, yeah, the same Mason from the Kramer house story, trouble seems to follow us. He didn't laugh. In fact, he went pale. My uncle saw him years ago, Mason said. Said if you acknowledge him, like if you wave or say something, he'll start coming closer. Every night. Until he's right outside your window. I asked what happened to his uncle. Mason just shook his head. He moved away. Never talked about it again. That night, I made the mistake of testing the theory. I was sitting on the porch, trying to cool off in the sticky August heat, when I saw him. Standing at the edge of the field across the road. Closer than ever. For reasons I still can't explain, I lifted my hand and waved. His head snapped up. Even though the distance was there, I swear I felt his eyes lock on mine. My chest went cold. He didn't move, but his posture shifted, like he was acknowledging me back. I ran inside and locked the door. After that, he came every night. Always closer. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. and find him standing at the edge of our yard. The next night, by the mailbox. The night after that, halfway up the driveway, I stopped sleeping. Stopped eating. My parents thought I was sick, but I couldn't tell them. How could I? They already knew, and they weren't doing anything. The night before school started, I made the mistake of looking out my window again. He was at the base of the porch steps. I don't remember screaming, but my dad came rushing into my room. He grabbed me by the shoulders, shaking me, telling me not to look. "Don't give him power," he kept repeating. The next day, my parents sent me to stay with my aunt 2 towns over. They told me it was for a change of scenery. But I knew the truth, they were trying to save me. I never saw him again. But here's the part that keeps me up at night, even now, years later. Last month, I came back home to visit my folks. First night there, I sat on the porch, drinking a beer, trying to convince myself it was all in my head. Then I looked toward the cornfield. And there he was. Hat low. Arms dangling. Just watching. And this time, he was smiling. There's a small town in Ohio that most maps don't even bother naming. It's the kind of place you'd only stumble into if you took a wrong turn off the highway. That's where my cousin Eddie grew up, and where he swore something happened to him that I'll never forget. Eddie was always into radios. While other kids saved up for video games, he spent his money at flea markets on old ham radios, shortwave sets, even busted CB rigs he'd tinker with in the garage until they sputtered back to life. His obsession only grew as he got older. By high school, he could pick up signals from hundreds of miles away, even from places that shouldn't have been in range. But in 2005, he found something he couldn't explain. One night in late September, while fiddling with the dials of his shortwave, he picked up a station he'd never heard before. No call sign, no commercials, no music. Just a steady low hum, broken every few minutes by what sounded like faint voices. At first, he thought it was interference. But when he turned the volume up, he realized the voices were speaking English. Except they were reading names. It was always the same pattern, a long stretch of static, then a voice, flat, mechanical, like it wasn't human, reciting a list of names, one by one. Sometimes dozens. Sometimes only a few. Then static again. The thing that freaked Eddie out was that the names were local. He recognized them. Classmates, teachers, neighbors. And they weren't common names either. He remembered one night hearing Judith Henderson, which was the name of his elderly next-door neighbor. Another time, he swore he heard his algebra teacher's full name. The next day, he tried asking around. No one else had heard the broadcast. A few people laughed, told him he was messing with them. But then, a week later, Judith Henderson died in her sleep. And that's when Eddie started keeping track. He wrote down every name the station said. Over the next few months, he filled an entire notebook. And sure enough, every single person whose name he wrote down died within weeks. Some from old age, some in car accidents, one even in a freak kitchen fire. Different causes, no patterns, except the names always came first, on that strange silent station. He tried telling people. Nobody believed him. Not until he showed me. It was Christmas break when I stayed over at his house. Around midnight, he dragged me into the garage, flipping on the shortwave. "Listen," he whispered. Static filled the air, a deep mechanical hum. And then, faintly, the voice. Michael Carter. Danielle Rhodes. Paul Anderson. I froze. Those were people we knew. Danielle lived down the street. Paul was a kid in my grade. I laughed nervously, said maybe it was coincidence. Eddie didn't laugh. He showed me the notebook. Page after page of names, each one crossed off after the obituary hit the paper. Over the next month, the names I heard that night started dying. Danielle was killed in a car accident on Route 12. Paul collapsed during basketball practice, heart defect no one knew about. And Michael Carter? He fell through the ice while fishing. That's when I stopped thinking it was a joke. And that's when Eddie made a mistake. In February, the voice spoke a new name. Eddie's name. I'll never forget his face. He went pale, his hands trembling as he gripped the edge of the radio. No, he whispered, no, no, no. He turned the dial, searching desperately, but the station was gone. Just static. For weeks, he didn't sleep. He kept trying to find it again, to see if maybe it would repeat. But it never did. The garage filled with empty coffee cups and scribbled notes. He barely came to school. On March 10th, Eddie disappeared. They found his car abandoned by an old service road outside of town, keys still in the ignition. The only thing inside was his shortwave radio, still tuned to static. No one ever saw him again. Here's the part that makes me sick. 2 weeks after Eddie went missing, I was messing around with one of his radios that my aunt gave me. I didn't even mean to, just curiosity. Around 1 a.m., I found it. The hum. The static. And then the voice. Flat. Mechanical. Reading names. The first one? Mine. I used to work late-night shifts at a small diner in Kentucky, off a lonely stretch of highway that barely saw any traffic after midnight. The kind of place where truckers stopped for coffee and pie, where the jukebox hadn't worked in 20 years, and the neon sign buzzed loud enough to fill the silence. I started there in 2012, when I was 19. It wasn't glamorous, but the pay was steady, and I liked the quiet. Nights were usually predictable, 1 or 2 customers at most, sometimes hours of emptiness where I'd just clean and listen to the hum of the fridge. But then she started showing up. It was always the same routine. Around 2:30 a.m., I'd hear the bell over the door, and in she'd come. A woman, maybe in her 40s, pale as moonlight, with long black hair that looked wet, like she'd just stepped out of the rain. She always wore the same thing, a gray coat buttoned to the top, gloves on her hands, and sunglasses, at night. She never ordered food. Only black coffee. No sugar, no cream. And she always sat in the same booth. The corner one, by the window. At first, I didn't think much of it. Strange customers weren't unusual on the night shift. But after a few weeks, I noticed something odd. Whenever she came in, the diner got quiet. Too quiet. The humming of the fridge seemed to dull, the buzzing neon outside went silent, and even the ticking of the old clock above the counter faded. It was like the whole world held its breath when she was there. She never spoke more than a few words. Coffee. Please. Her voice was soft, almost flat, like she wasn't used to speaking at all. The first time she unnerved me was when I went to refill her cup. She looked up at me from behind those sunglasses, and I swear I felt her eyes burning through them, sharp and cold, like being dunked in ice water. Thank you, she whispered. But her lips didn't move. The other waitress, Patty, worked mornings. One day, I mentioned the woman to her, and Patty frowned. What woman? She asked. The one who comes in every night. Long black hair, sunglasses. Always sits in the corner booth. Patty gave me a look like I was crazy. I've been working here 20 years, she said. Nobody sits in that booth. I thought she was joking. But she wasn't. I started paying closer attention. When the woman came in, no one else ever followed. Not a single trucker, not a single car outside. Just her. And when she left, I always found the same thing, her booth completely dry. No ring from her coffee cup. No crumbs. No sign anyone had been there. Except once. One night, she stayed longer than usual. I pretended to clean the counter, but I kept glancing at her. At one point, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out something small, placing it on the table. It was a locket. She opened it, staring at it for a long time, before whispering something I couldn't catch. Then she snapped it shut, stood up, and walked out without touching her coffee. When I went to clean the booth, the locket was gone. But the seat cushion was wet. Like she'd just climbed out of a river. The next night, She didn't show up. For the first time in weeks, I thought maybe it was over. But around 2:30 a.m., the lights flickered. The jukebox let out a single distorted note, even though it was unplugged. The clock on the wall stopped ticking. And then, I heard it. From the corner booth. A whisper. I turned, and there she was, already sitting, staring straight at me. But this time, she wasn't wearing sunglasses. Her eyes were pitch black. Not dark brown, not shadowed, black, like two endless voids. She leaned forward, her lips parting, and I heard her voice inside my head, not through my ears. "Do you remember me?" she asked. My throat went dry. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that doesn't mean happiness but hunger. And then she said my name. Full name. I never told her. Never told anyone at the diner. But she said it like she'd known me forever. I stumbled backward, knocking over a chair, and when I looked again, she was gone. The booth was empty. But the coffee cup was still there, half full. And this time, the liquid inside wasn't coffee. It was dark, red, and metallic smelling. Blood. I quit the diner the next day. Patty called me a coward. Said I was crazy. Maybe I am. But here's the part one can't shake. 2 weeks later, the diner shut down after Patty was found dead in that same corner booth. Heart attack, they said. But when I drove by a month later, long after the diner closed for good, I swear I saw her. The woman in gray. Sitting in the booth through the dusty window. Waiting. I grew up in a town in northern Minnesota, the kind of place where winters were brutal, the streets were empty by 9 p.m., and people left their doors unlocked because nothing ever happens here. That was before the knocking started. It was the winter of 2014, one of the coldest seasons we'd ever had. Snow piled up to the windows, the air so sharp you couldn't step outside without your lungs seizing. That's when, around midnight one Tuesday, someone knocked on our front door. It wasn't a polite knock. It was deliberate. Slow. 3 knocks. Then silence. I figured it was a neighbor needing help, maybe a car stuck in the snow. My dad went to the door, pulled it open, and no one was there. Just the porch light glowing on an empty yard, snow untouched except for a single set of footprints that led from the woods at the edge of our property. They stopped right at the porch. But there were no prints leaving. The next night, the knocking came again. Same time. Same slow, steady rhythm. This time, my dad didn't open the door. He stood there with the chain locked, glaring through the peephole. After a long silence, he said, "Go home." The knocking stopped. But in the morning, we found something frozen to the doorframe. A handprint. Bare. Pressed into the wood like someone had stood outside, skin to the freezing air, long enough to leave a mark. By the third night, my mom was terrified. She wanted to call the police, but my dad refused. "They'll laugh at us," he said. "No one's out there." But I knew he was scared too. Because I heard him load the shotgun before bed. Sure enough, at exactly midnight, the knocking came again. This time louder. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks again. My dad shouted through the door, "If you don't leave, I'll shoot." His voice cracked. The knocking stopped. But then, faintly, from the other side of the wood, came a voice. Low. Calm. Almost polite. "Let me in. It's so cold." My mom sobbed. I remember her clutching me, whispering prayers. My dad stood frozen, shotgun trembling in his hands. And then the voice said my name. Clear as day. It whispered, soft, almost coaxing. "Come on, my name. Open the door. Just for me." I didn't move. I couldn't. My whole body locked up, ice running through my veins. Dad finally shouted again, and the voice went quiet. When he threw the door open, the porch was empty. But this time, the footprints didn't just stop at the porch. They circled the house. Over and over, like someone had been walking laps around us in the snow. The knocking stopped for almost a week. We thought maybe it was over. Then one night, I woke to the sound of tapping. Not at the front door. At my bedroom window. My window was on the second floor. The tapping was soft, but steady. When I dared to look, my breath fogging the glass, I nearly screamed. A pale face stared back at me. Lips blue, eyes wide and dark. And smiling. I scrambled from my bed, ran to my parents' room, and dragged them to my window. But when we looked, nothing. Just frost clinging to the glass. Still, the next morning, my dad found prints. Not footprints this time. Handprints. All along the side of the house, pressed into the snow as though someone had crawled on all fours around the walls. The last night was the worst. We were all huddled in the living room, lights on, shotgun in my dad's lap, when the knocking came. But not just at the front door. Every door. Every window. 100 slow knocks in perfect rhythm, wrapping the house like a heartbeat. And then, silence. Until the voice returned. Not outside this time. Inside. Right behind us. "Thank you for letting me in." The lights went out. When they flickered back on, just a second later, everything was normal. No voice. No knocks. But the shotgun was gone. And so was my dad. They found him weeks later, a mile into the woods. Frozen solid, his expression twisted in terror. No tracks led to him. No signs of struggle. Just him, standing upright in the snow like he'd been placed there. We moved away that spring. But sometimes, in the dead of winter, I still wake up to the sound of knocking. Slow. Deliberate. 3 times. And I know, wherever we go, it'll always find us. When I was 19, I spent a summer in a small Ohio town visiting my cousin, Clara. The place was quiet, almost too quiet, the kind of town where everyone waved but no one really talked about anything important. People worked at the mill, drank at the single bar, and prayed in the little white church on Sundays. But there was one place no one mentioned, Miller Road. At the end of that road stood an abandoned hospital. Not a massive building like a city hospital, but a squat, 2-story structure with boarded windows and weeds pushing up through the cracked pavement. Everyone in town acted like it didn't exist. If you asked about it, they'd just shrug or change the subject. Of course, being teenagers with nothing better to do, Clara and I decided we had to explore it. It was late July, muggy and still, when we finally walked down Miller Road. The streetlights ended halfway, leaving the rest swallowed in shadow. The hospital loomed ahead, its sign so weathered you could barely make out the faded red cross. The closer we got, the colder the air felt. And I swear, I could hear something faint, like the beeping of old medical machines, even though the place had been shut down for decades. The front doors were chained shut, but one of the side entrances was pried open, like someone had forced their way inside. We hesitated, then Clara whispered, "Just for a minute. Then we can say we did it." So we went in. The air inside reeked of mildew and rust. Our flashlights cut through dust so thick it looked like smoke. Hallways stretched on forever, lined with peeling paint and doors half-hinged, swaying slightly like they were breathing. We found an old waiting room first. The chairs were overturned, magazines from the 80s scattered across the floor, pages crumbling at the edges. The reception desk still had a phone on it, bright red, like it had just been placed there. On impulse, Clara picked it up. And froze. I could hear it too, faint static, then a woman's voice whispering through the line. "Get out. They're still here." Clara slammed it down. We should have left then, but curiosity pushed us deeper. We wandered through exam rooms filled with rusted gurneys and cabinets hanging open. In one room, the walls were covered in children's drawings, stick figures with huge black eyes, all holding hands in a circle. Some of the drawings had been scratched out violently, like someone couldn't bear to look at them. As we explored, we kept hearing noises. Footsteps that didn't match ours. Doors creaking shut down the hall. Once, I swore I saw a shadow slip just around the corner ahead of us. Still, we pushed on, until we found the basement stairs. The basement smelled worse than upstairs, like rotting flesh mixed with chemicals. Our light shook as we descended, and I noticed something strange. The walls were covered in deep scratches, like fingernails dragged along plaster. At the bottom, there was a long corridor lined with locked doors. Each one had a little window, and when I shined my light through, I saw things that didn't make sense. One room was filled wall to wall with broken wheelchairs, stacked like bones. Another had dozens of mannequins dressed in patient gowns, all facing the same direction, as if waiting for something. In the third room, I saw Clara's face staring back at me. But she was standing right beside me. I nearly dropped my flashlight. The figure in the room looked exactly like Clara, same clothes, same hair, but her face was pale, her eyes too wide, her mouth pulled into a grin so stretched it looked painful. She lifted a hand and waved at me. I stumbled back, screaming. Clara yanked my arm, dragging me down the hall as the sound of pounding fists echoed behind the door. We ran until we found a stairwell that led back to the first floor. But as we climbed, I noticed the walls weren't scratched anymore, they were bleeding. Thick, dark streaks running downward like the building itself was alive. We burst out into the hallway near the entrance, gasping, trying to find our way out. But the layout had changed. Hallways looped where they shouldn't. Doors led to dead ends. It was like the hospital was shifting around us, trying to keep us inside. Finally, we saw the open side entrance again. But just as we reached it, we heard footsteps, fast, heavy, coming from behind. We spun around. And saw doctors. At least, they looked like doctors. Tall figures in stained white coats, faces hidden behind old surgical masks. Their eyes glowed faintly in the dark, and in their hands they carried rusted instruments, saws, scalpels, drills. "Admit them," one said, voice muffled and hollow. We sprinted for the door, bursting out into the humid night air, not stopping until we reached the end of Miller Road. When we finally looked back, the hospital was dark and silent. No glowing eyes, no figures chasing us. Just the same boarded-up buildings standing quietly in the night. We never went back. But here's the part that still keeps me awake. A month later, I was back home when Clara called me, her voice shaking. She said she'd been having nightmares of the hospital, dreams where the doctors stood around her bed, whispering about treatment. Then, one morning, she found something on her arm. A hospital bracelet. White plastic, with her name printed on it. And the date, August 17th. The exact night we broke in. She's still wearing it. No matter how many times she cuts it off, by morning it's back. And sometimes, when the bracelet feels tighter, she swears she hears the sound of a red phone ringing somewhere in her house.